Welcome to the Be a Human in Business show with your hosts, Tracy Borison, founder and personal branding coach at TLB Coaching and Events, Tara Argo, founder and relationship strategist at Argo Operations, Tawana Taylor, founder and project management consultant at Bootstrap Dreams, Debbie Aquara, founder and principal consultant at Niche Customer Experience Consulting Firm. Let's start the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Be a Human in Business show. Tara and I are so excited to have a special guest with us today, filling some very hard to fill shoes of our Miss Debbie and Miss Tawana, who we are missing today. So we will send you guys our hearts. Sometimes I know we have this conversation every time. I think mine's getting better though. Nicholas's is so cute. It's like very cricket and so cute. People enjoying their summer, and I'm very glad that people are enjoying their summer, and I'm in my house, but I'm going camping later, so same thing. We are very happy to have our good friend Sonita Reese with us today, and we're going to be having I'm sure we'll get very deep because we normally get very deep, but a very intriguing conversation around the concept of leading for whole person success. So looking at it from, we'll explore some of the concepts of whole person success, really what is that, and talk about what it is and how we can get to it. And then as leaders, how we can have that for ourselves and how that helps us create a space for other people to have that as well. So before we dive right into the conversation, Sunita, could you please give us a little intro of who you are and what you're all about?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Thanks for having me. It is just an honor to be spending my afternoon with the two of you. So my name is Sonita Reese, and I am the Chief Encouragement Officer and Lead Consultant at First by Five, which is a consulting and coaching company that helps leaders, people-centric leaders specifically, and entrepreneurs lead with conviction, execute what matters, and grow their businesses in a way that both their people and the bottom line can win. So that sounds very like, whoa, okay, like I've got everything figured out. Well, I started this journey about 3.5 years ago after spending about 18 plus years in the corporate and nonprofit worlds. And part of the reason I'm really passionate about growing in a way where people and business can win is because through those 18 plus years, which included just a number of incredible experiences, meeting amazing people and getting to do some cool work, I battled burnout a couple times and then just also saw a lot of wasted potential and unnecessary frustration to the point where it caused some big problems. And so I hopped off what I call the bullet train to burnout again, because I was headed there, and it wouldn't have been good for me and my family. And I took a couple years to be at home with my two boys, and then launched into the world of entrepreneurship, doing some different stuff. But this is where I found my space, where everything is kind of coming together for me. And as I know we talk about, or you all talk about on the show, in part it's because I'm finally figuring out how to be myself and bringing the skills and abilities and passions I have to serve people who want it. I'm going to say more than need it, because many of us need things, but not all of us want what we need. So on a personal note, I have two amazing boys. They're 8 and 11, and we live outside of Washington, D.C. We spend a lot of time on the soccer field because they both play that sport, which I don't mind. I love it. I was a soccer player myself. And when we're not doing that, I just, I enjoy just kind of the everyday adventure of life and big adventures like travel. I love coffee and a good book. So anybody listening who just wants to pop in a comment with some random recommendations for either of those two things, please be my guest.
Love that.
I'm currently reading the Rose Code, and it's pretty good. Recommend so far. I'm on like chapter 5. That's pretty good. Awesome. Thank you, Sunita. We're so glad to have you. And I know that you and I originally connected over this concept of businesses succeeding as people succeed, not in that being a trade-off. And that's really where we're leading to with this conversation around whole person success. And so before we started recording for today, Sunita was diving into what her her definition of whole person success is. So because you're our special guest, I'm going to give you the floor, Sunita, to create that definition. And and I know you guys are going to expect me to say this, but everybody's whole person success is unique
Yes.
to you. So we will have some definitions and everything today, but it's conceptual, and I want you guys to look at it from your point of view. But again, it's primarily that there's more to you than just one dimension. So Sunita, hit it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. So just to reiterate what Tracy said, right? Your definition is your definition, but think of it as a pie. You know, I think many of us, if you say, what is it like to be successful? The immediate images that might come up might be dollar signs or your name somewhere. Or if you're somebody that's always desired a family, like lots of kids or whatever that is. But just to give us something to work off of, whole person success is being healthy and whole across the dimensions of your physical being, your mental being, your spiritual being, and your emotional being. So recognizing that there are all those different components into us as people, and being wholly successful means that you are whole in those areas collectively and succeeding according to, you know, what you define to be that.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's so important, because when I think of the concept whole, it's actually funny. I was speaking about this on a podcast just the other day about how I was like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I had a senior level position at a tech company. My husband, was now my ex-husband, was senior vice president at a bank. We owned 2 different houses. One we rented out. We both had cars. He bought Armani suits, right? It was just like all the things. 2 people who went to business school say success would look like, right? And it felt empty, completely empty. And it's funny for me because personally, my journey, when I went to business school, I got my first corporate job when I was 23 years old. And even in that first job, I remember sitting at my desk and thinking, what am I doing here? Right? I worked in corporate marketing. And I was just like, how am I contributing to society? And to me, I wasn't. And it was really interesting because over the years, a lot of people have been like, oh, you contributed this and you contributed this. And I was like, oh, the problem that I had with it was that wasn't the contribution I wanted to make. And so I put so much effort in aligning my life with what society, like, I'll be honest, what business school taught me success looks like. And it wasn't success for me. I didn't feel whole. And I think it's interesting when I look at it from that perspective, because so many people from the outside could be like, oh, you have all the things, your life is great. And you're like, well, thanks. But no, you don't feel whole. So this is, I don't know. And I would love to hear your guys' perspective on this too, just on the concept of feeling whole, because when I didn't feel whole, I had no idea what feeling whole felt like. That my status quo was not feeling whole. My status quo was just, I don't want to say a shell of a person, but like the longer I spent in a not great relationship and in my corporate career, I became more and more a shell of a person. I was just doing things because to have things to do. And it didn't feel whole. So I'd love to hear if either of you have any specific things for our listeners today that were like, ooh, this was a thing where it became really obvious that I wasn't feeling whole and I needed something else to feel that, or when you felt like, oh, because I'll be honest too, I woke up this morning and I was awake for a little while. I was lying in my bed. It's Saturday, right? And like my 3-year-old just I hear his like little feet because he runs down the hall. He just like comes and he flops into the bed next to me and he's like still sleepy. So he's just cuddling, but then he's rolling over and like making faces at me. And it's just like, this is the best. like I'm just lying there feeling so whole. But 10 years ago, I never could have imagined that because I wasn't in a place to imagine what whole was. So I'd love to hear some from your guys' perspective, anything anything you can share about your experience in that concept of feeling whole.
Absolutely. Sunita, you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. So actually, this is a really interesting concept because I too did not know what whole was until COVID, to be really honest, right? Like I existed. So Tracy's feeling or thought is like she felt like a shell. Well, I was going through the motions, right? I was doing what I had been conditioned to do, which is you go to college, you get a good job, you work really hard, and like my career is my life. And I didn't really know my daughter. That was a huge realization for me. Because, and when I say that, it sounds kind of funny to say, but what I mean is like I would leave and go to work at 7 a.m. and get home at 7 p.m. and I would work 60, 80 or more hours, a week. And looking back, yes, and it was kind of the same thing. Everybody would look at me and say, well, she's so successful. She's making a huge impact on education in Oklahoma. I was able to impact thousands of teachers and thousands of kids every year. But I was completely depleted and I was completely neglecting my entire family, right? Because I was so committed to that, because that's what I thought was success and that's just the way I was raised. And so when I discovered that, it was like, wait a minute, I'm made up of all these other things. And I always knew, I will say this, I did always have a feeling that I was made for so much more. I was destined for impact and to make a greater impact in this world. So I did know that, but I never knew what it was until I started to have some downtime with COVID and I had to come home and work. And then I actually had time to be and to start to feel. And then at that point in my life, I said, wait a minute, like, I don't want to wake up when I'm 65 and I've just been walking through life completely blind, and just existing. And so that was for me, the real moment that I knew that there was so many different parts of me that needed fulfillment. And I wasn't fulfilled. And honestly, to be honest, I mean, I was probably very similar to you, Tracy. Like, I think that I just didn't even know who I was at that point. And so now I've been on this journey for a year of just figuring out what Tara loves. And it has been the most incredible journey. I just can't even tell you that I do encourage people to go on, because once you can secure what your values are, you can live into those on a daily basis. The fulfillment is completely, whether it's spiritual, emotional, whatever it is incredible. So it is that does happen at some point, but I too went through very similar experiences.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And Tracy, actually, I want to add a little bit to the definition that I shared before, which is, and there's a professional success too. I mean, I focused on the parts of the person, so the spiritual, the emotional, the mental, and the physical, and then you can extend that. And I'm completely leveraging this concept from Michael Hyatt, in three areas. One is the area of rejuvenation. One is in the area of relationships across all, across all the relationships in your life. And the third is professionally. So if you layer those three concepts as being part of whole person success, I'm sharing that with you because I want to give my answer to your question. What does that feel like? Well, let me start with what it doesn't feel like, which I didn't know. It is not, and what I experienced for so many years, never really being asleep, and when I'm awake, never being fully where I was, right? When I was asleep, a lot of times I was stressed out. There was like an underlying, I didn't have a smartwatch at the time, but I think it would have given me a lot of interesting stats. I think my REM sleep would have been like, what REM sleep, right? So it was always feeling like I needed to be somewhere else. It was this feeling of being about to miss out or about to fail if I didn't do something. And what it's not is not being present with the people you say are the most important to you. So I mentioned that, I left my corporate and nonprofit career and took a couple of years off to be with my boys. I didn't realize, similar to you, Tara, you said, well, you didn't know your daughter. I knew my sons, we were very involved with them, but I wasn't fully seeing them. Within like a couple months of being, I guess, a stay-at-home mom, I went from seeing them metaphorically in black and white to seeing them in color. And that's because I was really focusing on them. So what it doesn't feel like is constantly being out of focus. And I want to say, this is not, everybody has a bad day. You know, we all sometimes have interactions that are less than perfect, and there are those feelings, but it's that constant feeling like there's static. So that's not what it feels like to be whole. A third way, and I'm just going to speak I think somebody needs to hear this, which is why I'm going to say this, is in your physical body. I realized later, stress really had wrecked my body a lot. And so it was uncomfortable, but normal for me to constantly be in pain, particularly in my neck and my shoulders where I carried stress. And I go to a chiropractor, exercise, do all those things. Constantly be in pain, constantly have stomach issues because of stress. Not constantly, but several times, more than I care to remember, being extremely sick and pushing through when really it wasn't necessary. One of those for me involved a transatlantic trip where I had extreme bronchitis, and I ended up going to see a doctor in London after the big event was over. That is not what it feels like to be whole. So I'm not saying you can never get sick, but feeling so extreme, I just got to push through. This is what, that is not whole. So let's flip that. What does it feel like to be whole, right? So one is being at peace. I am a person of faith, so I'm going to bring this up. It is being at peace in here in my soul, that if I never did another thing, like not everything is okay, but it is okay. That is part of wholeness. Another thing for me, especially I'm realizing this on this trip, because I'm working, you know, my boys right now are with their cousins, and that's okay. I'm not stealing from them, because we talked about it with my family, you know, when I committed to this time with you lovely ladies. My husband said, that's fine. Well, and you know, my brother-in-law has even made it possible for me to be in this gorgeous space today. So I feel awesome because I am not stealing time from my family. And just very explicitly, there's a phrase that I heard recently, which is be where your feet are. Have either of you ever heard that?
No.
I don't know where it comes from. I want to say it's a Southern saying, but I think I'm wrong. So I got to check.
I love that.
But be where your feet are. And for so much of my life, but especially in my corporate career, like, yes, sure. I know all of us, we come from this background. So clearly we have delivered and contributed value and been able to show up. But I cannot remember being able to wholly and fully, with all of my focus and in my body, with, you know, the full focus and relaxation, be where I was. I was always a little bit somewhere else. And so I think for me, that is one of the major feelings that I am experiencing, to be able to be where my feet are, like in this moment, and not be distracted. And I'll add one more feeling, which is, at the risk of sounding a little cheesy, to like myself and the journey that I'm on, even when it's not, and feeling that I don't always like every part of the process or every step or every day, but I'm enjoying this journey. I like this person. I like I like the mistakes I'm making. That for me is a sense of wholeness, because for so often I didn't, right? So if I just summarize all what it's not and what it is, it's distraction. It's feeling like you're separated in your body and your attention. It's this feeling of constant underlying stress, and it's physical manifestations that aren't related to a bad piece of fish or like a summer cold, where you are constantly either tight or not working in a part of your body. So yeah.
Oh, those
I
were
love
great.
And I love the piece about kind of being in love with where you are and the journey, right? Because I talk about the journey all the time, and it's as humans, we are meant to evolve and change as we grow, which means it's a constant journey. If you're not going to fall in love with the journey, then you're always going to be where Sunita said, somewhere else, right? Like you're going to be in the future, stressed out about that, or you're going to be in the past, surrounded by things you can't change. And being where your feet are is all I have control over right now. And when you can celebrate that fact, I mean, I like to use the phrase owning your personal brand. That's kind of when I think of fullness, that's the phrase I like to, like, you just own it. You are you, like you, but dare say love you. You love yourself and where you're at, right? And that is really, if you look at where you're at right now and you say, I'm not that, right? Like, so some of these things, right? Seeing in color. Ooh, I feel really like in black and white or gray, or like, oh, I do feel like I'm missing out or failing all the time, right? There's always something I'm missing. I should be doing that. I should be doing that. Right. There's a level of wholeness that's available to you still. And there's nothing wrong. That it's falling in love with the process means also falling in love with where you are right now. And to date, you have only been able to get to where you are. You didn't have the knowledge, the skills. I think we talked about this last episode too, of getting somewhere else. So now there's no place you should have been by now. Right? There's where you are, and right where you are is where you were supposed to be right now. And you can keep on a track, or you can change your track, or all of those things are decisions that are acceptable. There's no wrong decision. And if you're looking at this right now and you're thinking some of these things, you're like, oh, okay, I clearly need to work on my path to wholeness. Great. Start today.
That's
and
the first step.
Yeah. Got to take baby steps and be where your feet are as those baby steps go.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. And I really like the be where your feet are, because that is something that
it'll come back.
Yeah. Well, we're waiting for Tara to come back.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, perfect. What I was saying is that, like, that is something that I always struggled with, was living in the moment or being where my feet are, you know, because I always, and I'm very, Sunita, when you were saying about the sleep, like I would wake up all night long just thinking about, you know, I could never just live in the moment. And I would pray about it. I'd be like, I just want to just be at peace. I just want to be able to live in the moment. And I think it is so hard, but knowing that it is okay to have whole, you know, that there is the option to have the whole being and the wholeness, you know, it's just never talked about. That is the other thing. People don't realize it because it's not talked about. So they think, oh, well, I have my career and we're all in silos. Like we have all of these different parts of us, but they're never supposed to intersect. And I don't at all think that that's the case, right? I think that we should be intersecting those. And so I love to be where your feet are. And I'm really going to use that because that's something that I've struggled with for many, many years. And that I still continuously tell myself, like, and it's okay to continuously tell yourself. Yes. That was the other thing. Tracy and I, last week that we talked to Lindsay about that, you know, we're always going, well, gosh, I wish that I would have known that 10 years ago, but you weren't supposed to know that 10 years ago. That's okay. And giving ourselves that grace to know that we weren't ready to learn that yet. Right. So we're where we are today and we move forward from here.
Yes, absolutely. And Tracy, going back to something you said about fullness, like when you were in the corporate job with all the stuff, but you felt okay, like a shell. I think another great definition of wholeness is when you're so filled up that you can spill over to impact others. Like I know a lot of us or people listening to the show, and certainly you ladies, like there's a level of service, there's a desire to impact, but that, you know, when you're whole, you can spill over to provide that impact in a way that I should say doesn't deplete you, because I believe, and you know, I know this to be true from wiser people that have gone before me and also science, like we constantly have to pay attention to making sure we continue to stay filled and that we can rejuvenate, right? But when we're whole, we have sort of a base level of fullness that we can give away, right? So
I think and I think especially the people who watch this show will love that, because that's true, right? And I've felt it before where I'm trying to give, right? Like it's so important for me to give, but I'm giving from empty cup. And so
Yes,
if I'm giving from an empty
yes,
cup, I only have so much I can give, right? But
yes.
like now I'm just envisioning myself as like a waterfall, right? And now I can constantly
Mhm,
give because I'm overflowing with wholeness. And
mhm,
I wanted to just tie that quickly back into Tara, something you said about the silos, is that like when you have, and like, again, I feel like society, not that it's specifically teaching us this, but it celebrates this. So it's
mhm,
subconsciously teaching us it,
mhm,
in that you have your work self and you have your
mhm.
family self and you have your social media self, and like all of these people are different things, right? And if you have silos, there's no possible way that you can be whole because you have walls between the parts of you.
Yeah.
And I'd really love to tie this concept back into like the overarching concept of the show, which is about leaders and how leaders can impact this whole person success. Because a lot of us, like I would say specifically people in corporate, but not just for people in corporate, I know a lot of people, like I work with a lot of entrepreneurs as well, and they have just these silos of who they can be on social media. I had one client who was like, well, I'm this on Facebook and this on LinkedIn and I'm this on Instagram. And I'm like, really? That sounds exhausting. I'm just me in all of the places. And he is like, you can do that? And I was like, yes. So assuming as a leader that you have teammates who have this have this narrative in their head about, and like I think I've mentioned this on the show a couple of times, but there's a HR lady that I follow on LinkedIn who even had a post a while back about if you're emotional, if your emotions are impacting your work in a negative way, you have to leave them at the door. And I was like, I just don't believe that's possible, right? I don't, that's siloing a part of me to say like, okay, my emotions cannot possibly be useful in my professional life,
Mhm,
which is not true. And I would like to I like to do shout outs. I'm a big fan of Dale Carnegie. So one of the things
mhm,
the Dale Carnegie training taught me was that there are no silos. There's no value in siloing those parts of you, right? Use your
mhm,
emotions when you're public speaking and bring all these
mhm.
things together into you. We're just one person. We're not all, but I know not everybody has read it, but I think most people understand the concept of Jekyll and Hyde, right? Like doctor, nice and composed,
Mhm,
crazy monster, right?
mhm.
Like this that
Yeah.
is that the goal? I don't think that's the goal. So I'd love to talk about this from like what are some of the things that we can do as leaders, knowing that this is the environment that most of our teammates and like some of our teammates might even have the expectation that that's what it's like. Sunita, I'd love to hear from you first
Yeah.
because I know that you work with a lot of leaders in this capacity.
So I have a lot to say about this, and I'm hoping I can remember my points because I don't, little notebook thing's not working. But so one, it's interesting. People are they talk about integrity a lot. And I think many of, let's say, insert whomever you might think of who is a siloed professional persona, different than their personal persona. I bet person, let's call him Stuart. There is no reason why I'm thinking of Stuart other than that came up. But let's say, Stuart does that, but you would hear him, he believes in integrity, he talks about it. So integrity, the root word of that, is integer, and that has to do with whole. So it is so fascinating to me, one, that people who believe in integrity from an ethical perspective, like we're not going to lie, we're going to do what we say, all those things, haven't necessarily translated that into connecting the whole person, because it is difficult to sustain integrity when you're not in integrity with yourself, which is essentially, right, what we're talking about. And it's not easy. So you asked specifically about leaders. Here's something that I both believe and that I've seen to be true. I think it is incumbent on leaders to do the hard work to get to know themselves. And that goes beyond self-awareness, right? I mean, there's so much we can talk about there, but only by doing that and diving into some of these deep things like values, like ensuring, not everybody has to like green things and want to run a marathon, but doing what they need to stay physically fit enough for the role that they play. I think leaders need to recognize that part of leadership is getting uncomfortable with themselves and figuring this stuff out so that they can lead, because leaders set the tone. And I don't have a perspective. I don't have a prescription around, well, you can't have this kind of culture. You can't have this kind of culture. But if you are not, as a leader, taking time to delve into these areas, that's not going to come across to your team. How are you going to be able to lead them? So going back to your example about the HR person saying you need to check your emotions at the door, I think the third thing I would say is that there's a lot of gray space around this, not only because we haven't been taught this, but I think that there may be a misunderstanding that in talking about this, we're saying, well, everybody can just show up with all their baggage all the time, and that's okay. No, that's not okay. There's still professionalism, right? We're all professionals. We're talking about a lot of things here because that's what the show is about. It's about being human, even though we're in business, especially because we're in business. But I would say, like, we acknowledge there's a way to be professional. If you've got to deliver something, you can't just go nuts and say, I'm having a bad day and that's okay. And you still need to pay me, dear client, even though I just yelled because I didn't like the color of your shirt. No, that is not okay. There's a level of professionalism. So I think that there's a misconception that if we're going to talk about this, we're somehow sanctioning, you can just be sloppy and unprofessional. I want to make it clear that that's not my perspective at all. I think it is working to there's a saying that I like, which is protect your most important asset, which is you, right? Especially in professional services, which is where I think most of us are. We are our most important asset, as are the people, right? So in the same way you would care for your manufacturing plant and make sure every piece of equipment was maintained, cleaned, in tip-top shape in order to produce at top output whatever's coming out of that factory, we need to protect ourselves, the asset, as leaders in order to produce our most important work. And so I think getting in touch with this concept of wholeness and doing that hard work, that is caring for the asset. And one of the jobs of leadership, right, is to set that tone, but also to provide a path and to guide. And so, we all have difficult conversations as leaders, but think back to a time when you didn't have a good night's sleep and, maybe you hadn't exercised in a long time and you had a difficult conversation. How'd it go? My guess, not so well. Wouldn't have been easy if you'd had a good night's sleep, exercised and eaten healthy, but you'd feel better, right? There's a coach once told me, when you have to make a difficult decision as a leader, HALT, use the acronym HALT. Never make an important decision when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So there are three of those words in there are emotion words, right? Angry, lonely, tired is not necessarily emotion. It's a state of the body, but hungry and lonely. So if we think back to our corporate days and you skip lunch, like nobody's going to give you a pass and say, well, you didn't contribute well today because you were hungry. My point is, I'm getting a little weedy here, but if you think like this is a coach who told me this, and that's always stuck with me, I'm like, leaders have, the more I'm talking about it and hearing these words come out of my mouth, I think leaders have a responsibility to try to be whole so that they can lead in the best way possible and bring these people that they have a responsibility for along in the best way possible.
Yeah, and something, Sunita, that you said that really struck me is that being a leader, we have a responsibility too, just to, and I'm all about connections and learning how to interact with other humans. And really that's so important, whether it's your team or your clients or whoever. But to me, it's work. Like this isn't, we just show up at work every day and we just do a job, right? Like if we're a leader, we are there to lead by example. And for me, you have to do additional work to get to know people, to get to see who they are. to really encourage them. But you have to be able to be willing and vulnerable to be able to do that, right? Like we don't just go in and do a job, in my opinion. And so I think as leaders, I would really challenge us to do more of that. Like, I'm not only getting to know ourselves, but then getting to know those that are around us and learning how to build relationships with humans.
That's so good. That's really good. And something you said earlier, Tracy, stuck out to me about, again, this concept of I'm one way on LinkedIn, I'm one way on Facebook, and I'm one way here. Do you guys remember the Spice Girls? I'm dating myself, right? But like, right, there was Sporty Spice and whatever.
I don't even remember all their
And
names,
I would always
Baby
joke,
Spice, Scary
Baby
Spice,
Spice,
Posh
Scary
Spice.
Spice.
Yeah.
I could hang out and talk about this for a long time.
There we go, right? Yes, exactly.
It's music. That's Tracy's jam.
Right. So, but then they came together and they were this group, but I would joke. And then I found out it's not a joke, but sometimes I'd have to do something. I'm like, well, today I got to go be Business Spice. Right. And it's like, and I remember there were a couple of times when I was working with cohort, they're like, you're really funny. I had no idea. It's like, well, yeah, it doesn't come out all the time. And some of this is just human, like being reserved, like whatever. I'm not making any kind of business statement about that. But to your point about needing to show up in a certain way, a lot of times I'm like, I got to go be Business Spice today. And if you think about that, this was a manufactured group. That's the persona they were told to play in order to make this music. Right. Yeah. And so again, hindsight is 2020. I'm different now, and I'm different now for a reason, and that's great. But had I been more, I would say, integrated, right? I think I would have been able to contribute at a higher level, especially with people. And that's another thing, bringing it back to the leader. I have seen that when people focus on wholeness, they are able to contribute in a far more impactful way. And I'm borrowing from Peter Drucker, who is one of my kind of, mentors, and obviously not personal because the gentleman has passed away, but he said to always focus on contribution. And that's one of his key things in the book, The Effective Executive, which still has so much wisdom for us today. But when we're focusing on contribution, as opposed to who am I or who am I supposed to be, which is more about status, that changes things. So if we as leaders really want to make a contribution versus being known or achieving a certain status, then seeking wholeness kind of just makes sense, but it's hard, right? Because Brene Brown puts it really well. She says that it takes courage for us to rest and play in a culture that views exhaustion as a status symbol. And I love that quote because rest and play go into rejuvenation, and rejuvenation impacts our physical selves. It impacts our mental selves. And so all of that feeding into wholeness. So I would say that, if we're focusing on contribution and catching ourselves when we feel like status or personas are creeping up, that's something worthy to aspire to as leaders.
Definitely. So and to remember that, like, we all have egos, right? So it's like, I had a coach once who was just like, you can't get rid of your ego. You can just check it when it's starting to like rear its head. So it was a group program and I was in, and she challenged us all to name our ego, and I named mine Voldemort because I don't want Voldemort.
No.
If Voldemort shows up, then we're in trouble.
He who should not be named.
Right.
Oh, that's funny.
I got it. If it's my ego, I better be able to name it. But I just thought that was an interesting exercise from that, because I like, it's all well and good. And I speak about this a lot too, because I talk about being authentic. And I'm not authentic all the time. I try to be, that's my goal. And I don't, nobody can be a thing all the time, right? So like sometimes your ego is going to show up, and it's also fine, right? So like, I think a lot of times as leaders too, we create a different level, a higher expectation of ourselves to say, like, even when we're talking about the concept of wholeness. So like, okay, well now I got to go and be more whole than my team so I can lead by example and be more whole, right? And that is a way to lead by example, but it's different for everybody. Everybody is on a different part of their journey, and it is a journey. So there's always more to do, right? Like there's always more things I learn about myself that contributes to my wholeness. And the good news is that I get to discover those things because I'm looking for wholeness, right? And I think this is one of the things that I actually saw a Facebook post about this the other day, and a lady, they were out on a family day, and one of her kids found a quarter or something on the ground. They're like, "Oh, this is lucky!" And then she challenged them to find lucky things all day. And because they set out that day looking for luck, they found lots of lucky things. And so the concept is the same with really anything. And we're specifically focusing on wholeness today. So if you're looking for wholeness, the places you can find it become more apparent. Yes. And you'll try going for a walk. I was sharing this with Tara earlier in the week because I just went. I walked to. We have a little power center by my house. I think it's like a 7-minute walk, and I just walked there and got a taco for lunch because I decided I was going to. Right, I didn't need to work through lunch. I was going to go and walk and listen to an audiobook and get a taco and come back. And it was like I spent 30 minutes walking there and back and getting food, and it was like an amazing piece of wholeness. One, I wasn't hungry, and I'm like one of those hangry people. Hunger and angry go together.
Often.
So that's just, to me anyway. So that's just bad news. So like I wasn't hungry. I got some exercise, or I gave my brain a break from what I was working on work-wise. So I was totally rejuvenated. And I didn't look at it from a rejuvenation perspective. And now I'm going to look at more of these things like, ooh, what rejuvenates me?
Yes.
But it's like, again, these are when you're looking for things, you're like, oh, that was so rejuvenating. I just took
becomes much more clear.
8 minutes and had a hot cup of tea, right? Like, and you can be rejuvenated in 8 minutes. It doesn't have to take like a spa day.
Right. No, it doesn't. And we as leaders, I think, have not only the responsibility, but the opportunity to help shift that culture a little bit, right? Especially in North America, we have this thing where if you're not producing something or doing your work, then you're not working.
Yeah, you're not productive.
And so what if we flip that script on its head? Because we all know, the research is out there that shows if you're working more than 50 hours a week, you actually start becoming counterproductive. The WHO just put out something, this year that talks about how overwork leads to heart disease. And so, the WHO, right? World Health Organization. So all these things we know, but yet culture is just, one definition is how we do things. And we, especially in North America, are so conditioned to have this approach where like your work break is, well, you can skip that. Like if you really had to get something out the door, what if we as leaders can help flip that into, well, I care about you because one, it is personally important for me not to look at people like a transaction. Again, I am not responsible for the people who work with me or my clients. They take responsibility for themselves, but I don't want to view them as a transaction or an input into the work machine, right? So one, there's a degree of care there, which doesn't mean that you have to, be their counselor, but there's a degree of care there. Two, what if we flip this idea into seeing like, all right, I know that when we are regularly rested and rejuvenated as a team, we are able to fill in the blank, produce more, serve better, come up with breakthrough concepts, whatever your business produces, whatever your brand puts out there, into the world, we do those things better. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Like if we as leaders and more people could take that, then I think people would be happier. Insurance bills would be less, there would be fewer problems with school kids at home, and we would probably be much more successful in business and in the bottom line. So,
what I want to say something to that too, Sunita, because that brought up something for me. So my encouragement too is to leaders to be curious, always be looking for, for me, I was always one to look at if something wasn't working, there's so many incredible other ways to do things. So allowing yourself to do that with your team. And like you were just saying, like it you can come up with so much more if you're rejuvenated and if your team is functioning at a high level. And so being curious and opening up that versus, again, just showing up and doing a job. So for me, it's being a little bit more present and doing that in a way that's reflective of, everyone and not just, that single being.
That's good, Tara. And one thing I've realized personally lately is when I need more rejuvenation, I tend to get frustrated more easily and critical and small.
Yep.
I may not verbalize it. I mean, I'm an adult enough not to, but I know inside what's happening, right? So to that point, like as a leader, I want to be curious if something's not working, let's say with a team member, it's not a criticism and a condemnation, it's why, and
Always
what's causing this or what, but I'll just say it out there, what our internal dialogue sometimes is really different. And I have recently realized that for myself, that immature, non-leader-like response, that internal response happens when I'm not, when I tend not to be taking care of these other parts of myself. That's just something I've realized recently.
Yep.
And so,
and I think that comes with the self-awareness, that being super self-aware of ourselves and where we are. I know I was having a conversation this week with a lady, and she had just told me, she said, Tara, I just asked myself, instead of time blocking, that doesn't work for her. She said, I asked myself, how am I feeling throughout the day? Right? Like, where am I at? And so that I can get my fulfillment as well, so that I can be whole, because I can't lead from an empty cup. So, that is
so
really good too, Sunita.
Oh, you guys, it just as I imagined. We had a very wonderful conversation today. I'm just throw in one thing, and I feel like I did this at one other episode too, where I just threw in creativity at the end. But when I was just listening to both of you guys talk about this state of being that you're in when you're whole, and I'm imagining as a leader being in that space and having that challenge, right? Like, oh, something isn't working. How can we come up with ideas, and how can we get a list of these creative ideas? And if you have a team of people who exist in this place where they have, because I believe, again, everybody's wholeness is unique, which means everybody's creativity is also therefore unique. So when you're in this state of wholeness and you can come up with these new ways that you can see things, because you have the freedom to do that and you have a space to be able to do that, like, wow, just imagine, like, if you're coming up with answers, even if you're in like your prime creative mode, you're coming up with one array of possible answers. And if your whole team is functioning in that same capacity, holy, like, get the Post-it notes out, because there's going to be all the ideas, and there's like for sure a winner in there somewhere. And then everybody also gets to feel the contribution. We talked about the contribution a bunch today. And so I wanted to leave everybody with that possibility, right? Of like what it feels like for you as your full self to just have answers, like a whole array of answers, and being surrounded by people who have that too. How much more creative, more innovative can you be as a business at the end of the day, because you have that? It's so powerful, and it really all does start at that basic concept of the people being whole.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
Man,
awesome,
this
you
was
guys.
a great conversation. You have to come back again.
I would be
There's
honored.
so much more we can cover. So much.
I am also always honored that we have the most amazing guests on the show, that we seriously could have like multi-hour long episodes, but we just want you guys to come back for more.
Well, that's a testimony to who you ladies are, like
Yes.
individually and collectively, who you pull into your sphere and the conversations that you allow to occur. So thank you.
So important to have these conversations.
All right, so with that in mind, we'll do our little show summary for you guys on all of these amazing things that we talked about today. So our concept for today was how leaders can lead for whole person success. We talked about the definition of whole person success in terms of how being healthy and whole across all aspects of your being, including the professional aspect of your being. That isn't something that goes missing in there. Oh, I scrolled way too fast. Is what happens when I control all the things. myself. We talked a lot around the concept of what does feeling whole feel like. Tara had a great point of be and feel to connect with what makes you whole, right? So that this concept of being and feeling. Sunita mentioned the wonderful phrase that we've all seemed to like glove onto of the where your feet are, be where your feet are. We talked about rejuvenation a lot and how we can look at how we can rejuvenate ourselves to keep that cup whole and also allow for the possibility for it to overfloweth and provide impact for more people. We did also talk about some of the things that being whole is not. So being whole is not feeling like you're about to miss out or fail all the time. It's not about living in a world of static. It is not about having a continual conversation about stealing time from other places. It's about being at peace in your soul, and it's about seeing in color, and having all of that. This is, I mean, I just keep getting this picture in my head. I don't know how visual everybody is, but like seeing in color is like the whole picture, right? Like it's the whole thing. And it is wholeness. This is what we're talking about today. So then we moved into the conversation about how leaders can support this concept of whole person success. And one of the things I love that you said, Sunita, was that it's difficult to sustain integrity. We used integrity as one example if you're not in integrity with yourself.
Right.
So guess what, leaders? You got to get the wholeness in yourself. And then we get that amazing opportunity to lead by example. There is a way to be professional and talk about deep things. I think this is a hugely important point, not just in this conversation, but in a lot of conversations when we're talking about being a human in business. A lot of times we've separated those two concepts, and they are not at war with each other. They can live in peace together. And we talked about protecting your most important asset, which is you. And then also as a leader, your people, right? It's people, and you can't forget about you as well. You are an important asset. I really love the HALT, that don't make decisions if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. I just think that
is so good.
I'm going to take that away for lots of things.
It's a great nugget
she
gave me.
Yeah. And that at the end of the day, leaders have a responsibility to focus on trying to be whole ourselves. And that is a gift that we can give ourselves, and then it is a gift by default that we can give to others. And when we focus on contribution, how we are contributing over your ego, whatever it might be called, Voldemort or other such things, focusing on contribution, we got to throw in the nerd stuff, because otherwise it wouldn't be a Tracy summary. Focusing on that contribution can really help, again, you, but it helps you lead by example in that arena, so that you get to surround yourself with people who are also making the contributions they want to make. So with that, you guys, it was so wonderful to have you, Sunita. We would love to have you back and talk some more, because we didn't even touch on vision and leadership vision and how this plays into things. So we'll have another conversation about that with our lovely Sunita. And again, shout out to Tawana and Debbie. We miss you guys.
We miss you so much.
And we look forward to seeing you guys on an episode soon. If you guys liked this episode, we would love for you guys to subscribe. We would also love to know, what is whole for you? What are some of the things that can contribute to the whole you? Share it in the comments. We would love to hear. And we'd love to hear where you're at on your journey. And we're empowering you. We're sending every listener the power to know that wherever you are on your journey is exactly where you're meant to be. And that if being whole as a leader is a focus for the next part of your journey, then we celebrate you in that. And we're really excited to share that journey with you. All right, you guys, that is it for today. Stay tuned for another episode soon. And until then, remember, be a human.
Be a human.
Be a human.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.